Hi guys, this is Dr. TS, and today we're going to continue our discussion on tissues by talking about a special type of tissue called connective tissue. So if you remember from our previous lecture, we've talked about how tissues are groups of cells and extracellular matrix and cell junctions that all come together to serve a specific function. And we talked about epithelial tissue, which is going to be really important for the lining, our skin, and the lining of organs. Connective tissue is actually really interesting because connective tissue comes in lots of different flavors, and I'll kind of talk about why that is. So connective tissue is tissue that acts as structural framework for our body. If we had to define connective tissue just as one simple definition, it would just be structural framework for the body. So connective tissue is going to provide some really important roles in keeping our body's framework beyond just skeleton and muscle and skin. There are kind of two major types of connective tissue. We have what we call connective tissue proper. This will consist of both loose and dense connective tissues. And then we have specialized connective tissues. So cartilage, blood, and bone are all considered connective tissues. I'll have a slide later talking about these specifically. But let's first talk about connective tissue proper. So the three components that we see in connective tissue are going to be the same ones that we see before. It's going to be made up of cells. Connective tissue is primarily made up of like fat cells and what we call fibroblast cells. Additionally, connective tissue is going to have a lot of extracellular matrix. So if you remember, our epithelial tissue didn't have very much of this. However, connective tissue does. Remember, this is providing a lot of structural framework for our body, so there tends to be a lot of kind of space between cells, and that's often filled with that extracellular matrix. This ECM is composed of what we call ground substance. This is a gel-like fluid that's going to be mostly water and macromolecules, so all those proteins and carbohydrates that help give tissue structure. So connective tissue will often look like one little cell here, one here, and then there's a bunch of macromolecules, proteins kind of in between. These protein fibers specifically are going to be really essential. So there's different types of protein fibers that can kind of connect these different cells to each other, and it'll be more dependent on the type of connective tissue that you have. And so the amount of each component, the amount of cells or ECM or protein fibers, is really going to be dependent on the type of connective tissue. So if you think of blood as a connective tissue, you might be like, well, that's kind of weird, right? We think of it as a liquid. That's okay, right? Blood being a liquid, it's still a tissue. There's still cells, there's still stuff between those cells, and they're all working together for a specific function. Versus bone, which we almost feel like is the opposite of blood. We think it's like this calcified, hard substance. The cells might be more tightly packed, there might be less ECM, but again, it's a connective tissue. It's providing structural framework to the body. So connective tissue proper is made up primarily of fibroblasts. So these are little special types of cells. Additionally, lipid cells or fat-producing cells. So fat cells in your body, you think about layers of fat in your body, is connective tissue. Additionally, it's also made up of what we call collagen. Now, you might have heard of collagen being something that you can drink or eat to kind of make your skin and hair look healthier, because it is an important part of those. But collagen is really important in helping hold connective tissue together. So it's some of those protein fibers that stick these cells to each other. There's two types of major connective tissue proper, loose and dense. Loose is often found between organs, is really important for absorbing shock and binding organs together. So if you think about your abdominal cavity, you have your liver, your spleen, your small and large intestine, your stomach, going down into your reproductive cavity. And so all of these organs are kind of separated by this loose connective tissue proper. So you might have some fat tissue in there, some of these fibroblasts that help keep these organs in their spaces relatively similar, and it helps absorb any shock that your body might take. Dense connective tissue contains much more collagen, so it's much more resistant to stretching, Dense connective tissue is what makes up your joints, ligaments, and deep skin layers. So the connection points between bones, your joints, and your ligaments is made up of that kind of more dense connective tissue. So there's going to be much more cells compared to your extracellular matrix. And that's going to help bend your muscles, bend your arms, bend your bones. Again, really important types of connective tissues that kind of all fall under this major umbrella. Then we have our specialized connective tissues. So like I mentioned, we're going to talk about cartilage, blood, and bone. So cartilage is the flexible connective tissue that helps protect joints and bones. So you have cartilage kind of between where your bones are reaching. So if you think about your knee, this is a kneecap here. There's some cartilage. This is cartilage. So that every time you're bending your knee, right, you're bending like your femur bone, you have to bend it against. You don't want those bones to scrape together because that does not feel good. And this helps reduce friction during movement. It helps provide structural support as well. So we call this a specialized connective tissue. Bone is also a connective tissue. This is our hardest connective tissue. Bones are really important because they provide protection and support to the body. If we did not have bones, we would just be giant sacks of flesh. So bones provide a lot of really important protection and support to the rest of our body. And finally, blood, which is our loosest connective tissue because it is a liquid. And again, we have a bunch of blood. We have them all serving the same function. It's connected by this ECM, and it's really important in transporting oxygen, nutrients, and clearing out waste. And so again, you might not think of these things as tissues in the sense of like, oh, our skin is a tissue, or the tissue of your liver, or the tissue of your stomach, but they are. They're just specialized connective tissues that all are important for serving different functions. All right, guys, thank you.